Today we're going to be talking about chapter 19, and it's called An Age of Exploration and Isolation. So we'll be looking at the years from 1400 to 1800. And particularly we're going to be talking about European exploration and how motivated by a couple of things. I would say primarily profit, but also Christian faith and even a desire for adventure to explore distant lands. European rulers commissioned explorers to go off and find places that have never been seen. Talk about European exploration. I want to look at a couple significant moments. The big one around the tip of Africa is Vasco da Gama. He was one of the first, he was the first to successfully make it all the way around. You can see the other squiggly that turned around. That was Bartolomeu Dias. Tried to make it around Africa. Some had tried and failed. Da Gama was the first to succeed. But also notice over in China, the famous Admiral Zhong He led a series of 7 different voyages with a huge armada of Chinese ships traveling from Malacca to Calicut to many different places as far as Mogadishu in East Africa, just to explore and to spread Chinese culture. So I want to look at a couple of different things here. Exploration versus isolation. In terms of exploration, Zhong He would be a great example with the great Chinese fleet going to many distant lands. But then in isolation, eventually China abandoned these voyages and began to restrict trade. In fact, Japan even outlawed trade with foreign countries. And so some countries like the Dutch or the Portuguese or the Spanish began to become expansive and build worldwide empires. And some countries like Japan actually instituted closed country policies. And so today we're going to be talking about chapter 19, section 1. And the title of this is that Europeans Explore the East, and how advances in technology enabled Europeans to explore other parts of the world. One of the famous phrases you'll hear often in talking about overseas exploration, particularly with Europe, is God, glory, and gold. Kind of the 3 classic motives that drove these European explorers to go to distant lands. And so, this new desire for contact with Asia, I showed you those famous voyages of Diaz, of Da Gama, of many others, of Zhong He. And one of the greatest motives for these distant and dangerous voyages was trade. If Spain could get a ship directly to India and back, think of how many middlemen they could cut out. If a ship could go all the way to China and back, that would eliminate the need for the entire Silk Road. So many people had been profiting serving as middlemen for international trade that it enriched every country en route from the Silk Road, from China to Europe. But if you could get a ship directly, one ship, that's all you needed. You would never have to work again. One ship from Spain to India and back would bring back enough wealth for that captain to retire. Whoa, this is like hitting the lottery, except it would actually work. And it's going to motivate people to gain great wealth. Also, the Crusades, while they were ultimately a failure in terms of retaking and holding Jerusalem, it opened up many new lands for trade. And so it opened up contact for Asian goods. Muslims and Italians began to communicate, travel, and engage in commerce with one another. But the ultimate desire, once more, was to get rid of the middleman. Why go through India if you can go directly to China? If you want spices in India, why go through Turkey? Why not just go directly to India? There was also a religious motive. Remember previously we had talked about the Counter-Reformation and how the Catholic Church did make some fundamental changes, but ultimately decided that they needed more people. And so Ignatius of Loyola created the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits, who traveled all over the world. So with all of these explorers, there were Jesuit missionaries, and they had a desire to spread Christianity. And this also spurred expansion. So when Cortez landed in Veracruz, he brought with him Jesuit missionaries. When these explorers landed in their respective colonies, they set up colonies, but they also established missions. For example, Bartolomeu Diaz, the first explorer to try to get around the tip of Africa, said he wanted to serve God and his king. But none of this would have been possible without new technologies. In the 1400s, the caravel was a new method of sailing that made it possible to sail against the wind. If you look at a sailing ship, notice that you can turn the sails in any direction, so you can catch the wind from whatever direction. So that caravan would make it possible to propel your craft even if you have a strong headwind, even if the wind is blowing against you. Also, the astrolabe. The astrolabe made navigation easier, or even overseas navigation possible. It was a device that can triangulate your position even if you're in the deep sea. So if you're out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you look around, all you can see is ocean. That's disconcerting, right? That's terrifying if you don't have a way of knowing where you are. Now, that's why ships got lost at seas for centuries. If you lost sight of land, you might never find it again. That's what the story of the Odyssey is based on, written by Homer, right? Odysseus was leaving the Trojan War and got lost. And according to the legend, he spent 20 years at sea trying to find home again. If you don't know where you are, you might never find land again. The astrolabe allowed sailors to triangulate their position and figure out exactly where they are, even if they can't see any type of landmark. And then finally, the compass. The compass allows us to find our direction, even again if you have no landmarks to figure out. I know that I'm facing south. Why? Because I know the map and I know Greenville is approximately the direction I'm facing. I can use landmarks. Okay, I'm looking at the fire tower. Okay, that's a landmark to indicate south for me. But if I didn't have that landmark, I might need a compass. An astrolabe. Couldn't tell you how it works, but it's pretty incredible that this device is what makes overseas navigation possible. Now, the Portuguese were some of the leaders in this. In fact, there was a school of navigation in Portugal. You could study to be a sea captain, and you could graduate, and you could take a boat. Now that you know how to use an astrolabe, a compass, and a caravel, and you could sail anywhere you want in the world. And the Portuguese were some of the earliest explorers to sponsor these expeditions. And because of such, they had trading posts all along the west coast of Africa. Their goal, again, was to find a direct route to India, to China. Now, Bartolomeu Diaz attempted the trip around the southern tip of Africa, and he turned around. He made it around the tip and then turned around. Vasco da Gama, just a few years later, made it all the way to India. But of course, the challenge there is by going to India, he had to go all the way around Africa, the second largest landmass on the planet. It took him years to get to India and back. But yet, da Gama did return to Portugal with valuable cargo. He did make it there, and he did make it back, and he brought enough wealth where if he didn't want to, he never had to work again. Everybody wants to get rich quick. Da Gama did it in a couple years by getting a boat to India and returning to Portugal. And so, here is the king and queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, fresh after the Reconquista, have established the nation of Spain. And here is the Italian explorer, Christopher Columbus, approaching them and asking. Columbus had been around Europe seeking investors for some time. He tried the Medici in Italy. They said no. And he approached Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. An expedition of what Columbus was suggesting was going to be a great financial risk. He said, we can sail west and we can reach India and China. Now, at this point, the curvature of the earth was fairly well established in theory, but it had not been demonstrated in practice. I mean, Galileo was able to explain the curvature of the earth through planetary motion, through the Earth's rotation around the sun. It was well established again, but no one had tried sailing west. What's going to happen? Is all this theory going to be for nothing? Columbus was going to sail west. And again, the Medici laughed him out. They were like, no, we have other business to attend to. Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain said yes. And even though Columbus was not a great person, even though the legacy led to the encomienda system, to the enslavement of the natives, to the near genocide of entire populations, we still can't diminish the significance of this moment, where he said, I will reach India. Why? Well, da Gama did it, and he never had to work again, but he had to go all the way around the tip of Africa. If I can find a more direct route, I can get rich even quicker. So he tried it. What did he reach instead? Well, Fatima, he didn't find India. Of course, he found the Americas. Well, okay, to be fair, he found the island of Taino, which he renamed San Salvador. And then he returned. And later, okay, they found the Americas. But the point is that when he returned, and he said, I found people, I hit land, there's something out there. And they funded numerous expeditions. And more expeditions went and more went. And so much wealth was being brought back to Europe that Spain and Portugal almost went to war over this. In fact, both were Catholic nations. And the Pope helped to reach an agreement called the Treaty of Tordesillas. And in 1493, South America, Central America, was divided between Spain and Portugal. Which is why, if you go to Brazil today, they speak Portuguese. If you go to Mexico, if you go to Argentina, if you go to Chile, they speak Spanish. Why? It really dates back to this Treaty of Tordesillas. Now, Portugal established a huge trading empire. And so by 1509, 1492 was Columbus. Within a few years, Portugal had grown extremely powerful because of all the wealth they had brought back. They went on to defeat the Muslims in their country. They took over trade throughout the Indian Ocean. They went on to capture more lands, to seize ports like Malacca, Goa, or even the entire peninsula of Malay. And they were the dominant trading power throughout the 1500s. Lots of people are getting rich quick here. And lots of people wanted in on the game. The English and the Dutch, for example, began expanding their trading operations into Asia. The Dutch had, for example, 20,000 ships between their navy and their merchant fleet, more than any other nation in 1600. And so the Dutch and the English began to weaken Portugal's control over trade in Asia, until finally the Dutch became the trading empire. And so the Dutch East India Company rivaled that of any other trading empire. And so now we're at a time, by the end of the 1500s, where European countries are competing for trade dominance, influence, and power. And this is going to lead to some of the first global conflicts.
This was the British.
And so by 1619, the Dutch had established trade headquarters in Java, known then as Batavia. Dutch trade began to grow, and Amsterdam, for example, the capital of the Netherlands, became one of the most wealthy cities in all of Europe. And the Dutch continued to expand their influence. The southern tip of Africa is predominantly a colony of the Dutch by this time. The French wanted in the game and had gained footholds through the Indian subcontinent, through Indonesia, and had begun to establish colonies and trade empires throughout the world. But of course, Spain was also one of the most powerful and important of these trading empires, and they began to set up port cities along the coast of Africa. And these Portuguese traders began to just interact, and really it opened up a lot of these places to global trade.